Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Daniela Fayer. I'm the publisher at Defense One, and I'm excited to welcome you to our program, JADC2, Connecting the Future Force for Interoperability, brought to you by Booz Allen Hamilton. This program has two parts, and we will examine the evolution of DoD's concept for Joint All-Domain Command and Control, JADC2, and explore the path forward for effective and secure integration of federated data sources into an interoperable network. I'm joined today for the first half of the program by Gus Taveras, Senior Executive Advisor with Booz Allen Hamilton's Global Defense Group, and Brigadier General Rob Parker, Deputy Director J6, Chair for JADC2 CFT. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for joining me.
How you doing?
Thanks, Daniel.
Before we get started and dive into our conversation and questions that I have prepared for you, I'd love if you could both take a moment just to share with our audience a little bit about who you are, your background, and your current role. General, can we begin with you, please?
Sure, thanks so much. So, career signal officer with the United States Army. Some of my most formative assignments just over the recent years have been both as a Corps G6 for 3 Corps down in Texas, Fort Hood, Texas, with the United States Army. I also served in other roles as a G6, including the ASCC G6 for the U.S. Army Europe. I served as a CJ6 for Operation Inherent Resolve in Iraq and Syria from 2015 to 2016. And sort of culminated my time in Europe, going back one more time as a theater signal commander for all the Army communications forces, both in Europe and on the continent of Africa. Came out of Europe in 2018, went to the Army G8, where I worked as the division chief for our hardware division for C4 Cyber, moved up as the director of joint and integration for the Army, which really set me up well for my current role. Just came into this job at the beginning of the year here in January as the Deputy J6. But really my day-to-day life here is running the JADC2 CFT. And that's certainly an immense challenge, trying to bring together all of our joint forces and department representatives and organizations really to try to align against the department's JADC2 strategy. So thank you very much. Really looking forward to being a part of today's panel.
And Daniela, thank you for inviting me here today too. I have been in this community since 1989. I started off as a young Marine, where I started my career within the DoD. And then from there, I went to become an Army officer, both as a Marine and as an Army officer, served in Iraq. And after that, in 2014, roughly, I became this Chief Technology Officer of the Defense Intelligence Agency. And around that time, is when I joined Booz Allen Hamilton. Fortunate enough for working at Booz Allen Hamilton, I've been touching all the JADC2 efforts that the general was talking about, both at the budget, strategy, and policy level at the Pentagon under the G2 CIO, Mr. Garciga, supporting him as a contractor, and then also tying that very closely to the work we're doing up in Aberdeen Proving Ground. And we've had a lot of success with some of the stuff we'll probably talk about today, things such as Rainmaker and Orion Forge, and a recent demonstration that we did with the service chiefs, where the general's boss, General Morrison, was up there to see successful in actually bringing together the warfighters through a tactical data fabric. So I'm looking forward to talking about that today, and thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you both, and I appreciate the background there because I think it really does set up our conversation. You both have such deep experience and are both in the thick of this right now. So the first question I have is, what are some of the barriers that you're seeing right now to implementing JADC2? And General, let's begin with you, please.
Sure. So when we set out to put together our JADC2 strategy, I mean, it really was focused not only trying to get us to our future desired state in terms of meeting what's coming out from the joint warfighting concepts, but really getting after what we know to be some of those instinctive challenges that are going to be part of making a reality. And so when we look at it in terms of some of our lines of effort, We look at the data enterprise. We look at the human enterprise, technology, our mission partner environment. And so that really frames our mindset as we move forward. And so for me personally, it's just easiest to think of it in terms of people, processes, and policy, systems, software, platforms. And so when I think about people, I think it's pretty well acknowledged across the department. We've got a lot of work to do to really train and develop our workforce to be able to operate what's the modern technology that's available today, to be able to understand and implement it in smart ways, and specifically some training that we need on software development. I think much more than just relying on single subject matter experts that may be isolated across the force. There's certainly an acknowledgement that in this day and era, we should be able to have a combined workforce of our civilian workforce as well as our military service members that have at least the right skill set and knowledge to go in and do some basic coding, help do some programming, really to make us more responsive. And that really gets into that whole DevSecOps discussion and agile development. A positive though with our people is I think we have a really smart and motivated workforce. And not that that can offset everything, but it can certainly make a difference. And each day we bring in more and more service members who are really those, what we all describe as digital natives. And it's not as hard for them to think in these ways. And some of them are maybe even self-taught. We continue to see that across the force, and to see their energy, their focus, their knowledge and skills, I think that's going to help us while we get after some of this more structured training that's required. In terms of processes and policy, policy just continues to be an impediment on multiple levels, right, of keeping us from really getting to where we need to go. I'm encouraged that at the highest levels, I think we continue to get increased acknowledgement of that and the sincere effort to start making desired changes where necessary. When we think about policy right now, and particularly as we talk about data, and I know we're going to go there later on in the discussion today, there's policy that's simply outdated that we need to set aside. There's some that we could probably keep, but it needs a little tweaking to make it more relevant to today's environment and position us for going forward. And then there's some real gaps that we need filled with policy in terms of helping us think through and provide some guidance on some hard problem sets like multi-layered security, some of our data management. How do we bring that together? How do we keep it secure but still accessible at the right levels and locations across the data fabric? And so that work's being done right now. In terms of acquisition, as we think about policy, I think Congress and the Hill have done a very good job giving us quite a few ways that we can proceed and move ahead, and particularly with some of the recent software acquisition program methodologies that can be applied. Our challenge is getting out of our own way, and I think educating across the force better in our acquisition community, but also our services, not only to understand some of those alternatives that are out there that allow us to move faster in different ways than maybe we have in the past, but really getting after it and doing it and not being tied to what everybody has acknowledged is really a method we've followed since World War II almost, that 10-year plus development cycle that's just, there's no way we're going to get to where we need to go with that. And then finally, I'll just say back to the systems and software pieces there, a little bit of a mixed bag there. Certainly, we're having to carry forward some of our legacy systems until our investments realize new capabilities that come in that are really built to modern standards that facilitate the interoperability we need. In many cases, that requires us to put bolt-on technology on there. And so every time we add additional translators out there across in terms of moving data and messaging across the force, it may facilitate interoperability, but it also introduces latency. And some places that's very tolerable, but when we're talking some of our digital fire solutions or others, that latency multiplied across the network's just totally unacceptable. So that's an area that I see as a particular challenge. So I hope that was enough to sort of give you the full picture of some of the areas, at least, that are causing us some hard work and challenges, but I'm comfortable that we're bringing it together with the collective vision to push through those. Thank you.
Thank you. And Gus, I'd love to hear your list. Does it parallel? Does it add to it? What are you feeling about?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, no, Daniela, it does parallel the general's comments. And as it relates to the people, I want to really talk about, as we're doing all this incredible technology, and the general's right, we are moving along. We are addressing a lot of these challenges as it relates to sensors, command and control nodes, and shooter or fires nodes, as people refer to them. And this enabling technology underneath that he also referred to, which is that software, that AI, and that data. The big challenge is, how do we educate the culture? So one thing that we've done really well under the G2 CIO is evangelize what we're trying to accomplish. We're capturing strategy constantly on these artifacts, and that strategy is then driving policy. And so one thing that we've done pretty smartly is tying our AO, authorizing official, the guy that actually helps us with risk management, cybersecurity. And as we're doing the things that the general's talking about related to DevSecOps, we're thoughtful to be thinking about security and cybersecurity up front. So as we're building new technology and pushing it through that pipeline and getting it to production, we're thinking about these things throughout the process. But we've been able to move at speed, and I think we've been really successful, not only in the Title 50 environment, but also in the Title 10. I've never seen, I think the general would concur, I've never seen the G2, G3, G4, and G6 work so closely together as they do today. It's been incredible, and the ability to deliver technology, work to that, and collaborate. Even more so with the Army Air Force collaboration, and I know you're going to talk about some of the partnerships in the industry later, but with the collaboration with the Air Force, our synergy has been incredible. As soon as our GOs got together, made some decisions, a week after that, they flew into Aberdeen. We got together and we talked about some of the challenges and the barriers that you heard the general talk about as it relates to data. And I believe that that data capability is the enabler, the spinal cord to making all these things come together and work thoughtfully. So there's a plethora of barriers, but I think that we are working I've never seen anything like it, works much closer together to make this really a reality. And I see JADC2 coming to fruition.
Well, you both mentioned barriers. I mean, there's quite a few. This is a huge undertaking. But of those that you both mentioned, what are the ones that you feel are easy to fix versus the ones that might be, more challenging, that might need a little more emphasis or muscle behind them?
Yeah, I could jump in there, sir, if you want. I mean, the first thing I'll say is it's not such a barrier, but it's just some work that really has to be done. And it's the Title 10, Title 50 data challenges, right? And our CIOs are working together. Our OCIO, our G2 CIO are working really closely together to make that real. In our environment, we definitely use a thing we call the Department of Army Intelligence Information Systems. It's something we've been doing for the last 24 years that we've been able to smartly do. It's been a lot of human to machine to human translation of information from a Title 50 terror lining information that is sensitive, and we want to make sure that as it gets into the warfighter's hand, that sources and methods aren't there. But I'll say that they're working very closely together at the Army data boards, and I'm sure the general sits on these as well. And they're having the right conversations about how we smartly move data from the non-organic Army environment into the Army environment so we can make targeting decisions and also inform collection. Sir?
Yeah, so thanks. I think when I look at this problem set, and not that anything is easy that any of us are trying to accomplish as related to JADC2, I am encouraged that really the software and integration of commercial technology is probably the area that's most realistic in terms of easy. The technology exists, it's proven, we've seen it in industry. It's working. It's how do we bring that into the Department of Defense? How do we bring it into each of our services and combatant commands in a manner that is both compliant in terms of meeting some of our very special DoD requirements for protection, security, assurance, those types of things, but at the same time are not that hand up barrier or that we've reconstructed in such a way that it no longer provides the benefit that it has in the commercial environment. I think that's one area that we're collectively getting better at. I'm encouraged when I look out across the services from where I sit on the JADC2 CFT, and I know my boss, Lieutenant General Crowell, sees and thinks the same thing. When we see the services with some of their contributing efforts right now, whether it's Kessel Run for the Air Force, Orion Forge for the Army that come to mind, where they're really getting after that agile software development, working closely with the industry in a variety of areas. I think that's good. I know the question is, what's easy now? Everything's easier with more resources available. And I think that's where we find ourselves challenged as we look. There are opportunities, but they're put up against some really hard choices. Do we as a department want to or need to invest in deterrence capabilities like our nuclear triad that's under a great deal of discussion, a lot of money tied up there, potentially tied up there, that's absolutely necessary for our defense and our deterrence abilities as a nation? What about lethal capabilities, long-range fires, those types of things that really make our fighting force lethal, effective, and also contribute to deterrence of our strategic adversaries that are out there? Even logistics choices. I can think of Air Force fueler platforms right now. Those continually are brought forward. There's an article today in the Early Bird, reminding those hard choices of having to put money to sustain an old fleet instead of moving forward. Those are all very traditional hardware-focused decisions right now. But we've got to be able to find and dedicate funding to put the network in place, both in terms of the architecture, the connectivity, and the software and systems to run on that network to enable JADC2, because any of those types of hardware devices I'm laying out, while all great in their own areas, without that connectivity to really bring about the envisioned JADC2 framework, I don't think they will be survivable in a future threat environment. Thank you.
Hey, Danielle, if I can, on the general's comments on DevSecOps, one of the big things is as we move into the future and as general's trying to move us into the JADC2 realm, one of the big challenges is going to be ensuring that these systems, we have a lot of legacy systems that we're modernizing and transitioning into the future. But some of these systems do have to be, if they're going to take advantage of cloud technology, they have to become cloud enabled. They must refactor. One of the big challenges that the general puts on us is, hey, Gus, when we are contested, whether you're Air Force, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, you're contested in a highly contested environment across all these domains, air, land, space, cyber, we need to be able to react quickly through DevSecOps. If the systems are just lifted and shifted into the environment and not refactored, then we can't make those moves at speed as we would like to in this JADC2 environment. So back to you.
So many good points there. I want to kind of touch on, Gus, something you said when you started your answer before, was the role of data. These all have data points. That what's the role? What role does data play in the future of a truly connected force? I feel like you've both touched on it, but let's dig in a little bit there. General, would you care to comment?
Sure. Data is absolutely essential to the joint force today, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. As much as we look at commercial industry, it's same within the Department of Defense. Our challenge is the access to data right now, and that's both data that's within the Department of Defense under our control or under control of various services or other organizations, but also accessing critical data from outside of the traditional DoD ecosystem and environment. The way we see it, particularly as we talk this JADC2 framework, is really that access to the data. Some of it we know we need, some of it we don't know yet, but we learn as we go, right? And so as we look at that, we're really trying to build to information advantage, but it's not enough just to have a lot of information, right? What are you going to do with it? To what end? And for us, the essence of JADC2 is about building to decision advantage. And this has been talked about in multiple forums, really accelerating what has traditionally been referred to as the OODA loop, as far as the ability for a commander to act in a time-sensitive manner with quality, high-quality information, where either we have systems that are presenting options or assisting in those decisions to provide clarity in a very complex and complicated battlefield of the future. And so when we think of that building from information advantage to decision advantage, really ultimately at the strategic level, from the joint force and looking across our combatant commands down to joint force commanders, it's really about creating that operational advantage against an adversary.
So Danielle, on my side, I agree with everything with the general stated. One of the data to me is the strategic asset of today. It is the oil of our environment, right? And if you're going to be successful with data, you got to understand it intimately. Everything that we're talking about here from a JADC2 perspective, there's two sides of this data. There's the operational technology that the general is enabling, and then the IT that he's been managing for the last a couple of decades. The data will be the thing that helps us govern this architecture, help us manage this architecture, and also to take down the threat. We have been very fortunate down at the C5 ISR Center in Aberdeen, where we have, under General Gallagher's watch, we were able to put a tactical data fabric together. Now, there are multiple data fabrics in the community, but this tactical data fabric is really focused from that brigade battalion to the edge. And the ability to also not only make the data discoverable, synchronizable, and secure for the warfighter at the edge, also making the data discoverable and secure to our peers in the Air Force, right? So that was one of the big challenges we recently had and demonstration we had. And that enabled us not only to do JADC2, which means I'm letting the land domain be able to do sensing and discover what's out there, make that information available to the C2 guy to make an informed decision, push that then over to the fires guy to either shoot it or loiter and let it just go on and look at it, or share that information with our peer from a CJADC2 perspective and let the Air Force then be the shooter or the command and control guy or the sensor, truly tying us together. Again, like I said earlier, like a spinal cord that ties these services together. And then imagine adding the Navy in there and the other services that you heard the general talk about. Now you're making all those services act as one DoD, not as these separate entities trying to work together.
Hey, if I can follow up one more time with Gus, I mean, that was an excellent laydown. And so when we look at the JADC2 CFT, one of our primary working groups is aligned with our line of effort, literally our data enterprise effort, has been focused on running a series of data summits and data events. And that's bringing in the chief data officers, other key players, stakeholders from across the department, other organizations, combatant commands, the services. And when we're getting together, we're working to look to ensure that we're informed by industry standards, international standards in terms of how data is managed, as we think in terms of metadata, tagging, those types of things, bringing that in. How are we going to make all this function? Gus talked about a data fabric, and there's going to be a JADC2 data fabric, and that's going to be built out in a multi-partner environment. And the work on that's ongoing right now. But that is not the only data fabric. As he alluded to, services, other organizations, our allies, our partners will have these data fabrics. And when I speak to partners, it's not just in terms of international partners. It is federal, state, local, tribal, other government agencies, non-government agencies. And so we're moving toward a federated environment. We're still working through that series. We understand that we need to be only prescriptive enough in these areas to have the right alignment, but we don't want to be overly prescriptive in terms of standards. There'll be some places where those interfaces are necessary, and we need organizations to build to those levels. But it's about data libraries, other methodologies, APIs for moving that data around. The example that was given of really what I would call a mission threat, that's being brought into these data summits. We actually went out to the services, to the combatant commands, and asked them to nominate joint use cases, mission threads for a joint fight that we are bringing in and laying those down against this emerging data set that's being built out. It's informed by the DoD CDO, working hand in glove with them. The DepSecDef actually just signed on May 5th the memo entitled Creating Data Advantage, which really articulated to the department overall the data decrees and some other elements that we all have to follow. Those are getting translated down through the JROC into JROC strategic directives, which help to further shape and push the services in the right direction during their developmental processes. And then for us within the JADC2 CFT, we're working the publishing of our strategy implementation plan. They'll have very specific objectives, tasks, plans of actions, and milestones. And we see that nested and reflected as we work through and build a architecture. We have a reference architecture. We're on version 2 right now. It's getting ready to go to the JROC. And by the end of the summer, we think July timeframe, August, we will have version 3 that will help identify to all our stakeholders what's necessary to come in and operate effectively and interoperate within the data ecosystem that's going to be part of JADC2. Thank you.
So, let me just touch on something, Danielle, just for the importance of something he said. He brought up the API libraries, the API catalogs, that environment. It was so critical for us that our peer in the Air Force had that available to us. We ran into a problem where we were bringing in data and it wouldn't translate. We couldn't make sense of it. So we went into the Air Force's API catalog inside their UDL, grabbed that information. We used our DevSecOps environment. We coded that environment, pushed out the update, and then our end state endpoint was able to receive that information. So that is really a big deal. And I think the point I want to make there that is it's an ecosystem, right? And they all have to play with each other very well. And then we also have to make sense to one another in that ecosystem. So.
That's terrific. I love that you both jump right in after one another because this is a conversation, and I love that we have the perspectives from within the DoD and also from industry. So I want to kind of wrap up the session here because we're getting close to the end of time and ask what collaboration between the military and industry will be required to deliver this advanced analytics and accelerate the innovation, maybe touch on AI if you guys can, and think about the best practices you might suggest to our audience in migrating that way. Gus, I'm going to let you start and we'll give General the last word, okay?
Well, and thank you very much. I would say there is a lot of ongoing, I think the military has done and the government has done, both on all services, done a great job, including the industry, to help them out with challenges. A lot of the stuff that we are presenting, demonstrating at PC21, at the ABMSs are a collaboration between industry and the government. The recent TEMs I've attended that are made up of multiple services are comprised of industry and government. So we're we've done a very good job is what I want to say, and accolades to the military. On the AI side, it's very critical. You heard Mr. Miller when he was sitting with General Parker talk about AI and the narrow AI, and we're focused on all this, the easy, cute stuff that's going on, and we need to focus more on that back end AI pipeline that ensures that those technologies at the edge function as intended. That requires us to create a pipeline, just like we've done with DevSecOps and software, to ensure that the software stays current. And when you're in a highly contested environment, you're not just thinking about software, you want to think about that AI. We also want to be thoughtful of that back-end AI pipeline that ensures that the inference, the diagnostic data comes to the environment. We can train that information and continuously improve the performance of our algorithms at the edge. Turn it over to you, sir.
Hey, thanks, guys. So I think one of the greatest examples of collaboration that's going on today is really the increased use of the CRADA, the cooperative research and development agreements with our laboratories and really small industry, maybe some of our non-traditional partners, that allows them very unique and special access in a legal manner to come in and maybe get some insight on threats and other aspects of challenges to our mission set that they may not be otherwise exposed to. And it's mutually beneficial. It helps DoD, it helps the services. but it also helps that industry partner really to build a better product, in many cases, a dual use product that is something that, while obviously the DoD is very interested in, it also gives them a better product that they can turn around with their outward face to consumers across the United States or even in a global platform. And we're able to help that. And we've seen great benefits, I think, across all the services with that. The other areas where Gus already highlighted is those JADC2 contributing efforts of the services, the Project Overmatch, Convergence, ABMS. Those venues are great opportunities for industry to really get in and get involved. When we look in there, there's certainly AI portions in each of those areas as we speak to machine learning, predictive analytics, other aspects of that. They aligned, really limited only by the imagination, whether we're speaking to improving our ISR capabilities at edge, really trying to have rapid turn on things, particularly like our intelligence products that used to get pulled back to the continental United States, reviewed, pushed, and then back to theater. We simply don't have the pipes or the time to do that. And so things that help us get after that at the combatant command level, at the joint force commander level, and really at the tactical edge, extremely beneficial. Things that help us with our logistics, understand ammunition loads, quantities, where our forces are, where other assets are, and how to help us move and allocate those in ways that maybe we couldn't have previously because we didn't have the data and we didn't have the ability to consume it at scale. Sensor to shooters been hit on. There's some great efforts out there. Project Convergence has some very good shooter to sensor, so does ABMS. They're both working hard at that problem set. But then for us, when I think JADC2, and really going back to the central topic here of data and our networks, particularly in those denied, degraded, intermittent, and limited environments, we need that smart routing, not just software-defined networks. We need to help move the human back to the side of the loop there and really have our sensors integrated that either help us secure that network or when it's unavailable, rapidly and quickly reroute it in ways that maybe we would not have previously, ensuring that we're moving only the right data and the necessary data where we need it. And so in closing, I would just say we're off to a good start. Some places to look are definitely at the DoD data strategy, this recent document that I mentioned from the DepSecDef, creating data advantage. Those are really good areas to look at that start shaping, and industry can really reach out directly to our services, our combatant commands, particularly NORTHCOM, STRATCOM, both working some great efforts that have been out there in public media, all trying to get us closer to this JADC2 framework that's going to be essential for the United States Department of Defense for the well-foreseeable future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I said I was going to give you the last word there, but I think I would be remiss on this particular topic if I didn't touch just very briefly on securing critical information collected across agencies and service branches. I think there's a lot of security issues. I know Gus brought that up. And so, General, I thought I might ask you to just touch on that really quickly, and then we'll have Gus follow on.
Sure. Yeah, very appropriate question. We could go a lot of different directions with that one, but to really try to give you just a straight and simple answer, I think it ties to the theme of today's discussion. We really need data-centric security for a variety of reasons. In the past, and even currently today, we still segregate our networks and organizations and really blocking off more than we need to. And so if we are saying JADC2 is about sharing information, but also protecting and assuring it at the same time, whether it's with our allies, our partners, or even amongst our own joint forces, if we don't get a little smarter in how we do that, we're not going to make the advances we need to. The identity credentialing, access management, certainly one of those areas. I know others have heard General Krall, my boss, speak to that as something that we really need. There's certainly some examples out there we've seen, but we really need to be able to do that at scale. And I think when we combine that with building out our data fabrics, we'll be in a much better place than we are today.
I'm going to ask you to follow on with commentary, and then also, do you have any questions for the general? And we can wrap up there.
Thank you, Daniela. So one thing I definitely want to touch on, I agree with what the general was saying. We are definitely focused on trusted data format technologies, attribute-based access technologies. And you heard him talking about at the very edge using that smart routing technology. And how do we smartly do that when we're disconnected? How do we manage encryption when we're disconnected? How do we manage these policy keys when we're disconnected from those warfighters, and ensuring that when they do persist data back to the larger tactical brigade or the enterprise, that nothing is compromised. And I can see a future, and we definitely have the technology. I can see a future where these data fabrics are multi-level secure, and you can actually share information, and the policy and the attribute-based access and that trusted data format is the thing that drives what you can and can't see in the shared network. Because as you heard, I'm talking about the multiple and disparate networks. The environment that we share should be that one that allows us to see it through that policy. And I would love to hear what the general's thoughts are on what I just shared.
Gus, I think what you articulated was spot on, and that's definitely the consistency of the dialogues, the discussion, and importantly, the actions that are coming out of this series, the data summits and data events that I referenced earlier. I'm confident that we've got the right people working some really hard problems, but as we talked about earlier, technology is only part of it. We got to get the policy to change and come along with us. We got to have the right resources to make it a reality.
Well, Daniela, I just want to add to the general's comment as before he puts a period on it, is going to be strategy, evangelizing, and educating our culture, because that's the only thing that's going to allow them to embrace it and adopt it as we deploy it. So that's all I have.
Gentlemen, this has been my pleasure. Every single time I host a conversation, particularly around these critical and large topics, things that we're trying to accomplish, such as JADC2, I learned something. So thank you so much for sharing with us today, for sharing with me and with our audience. Unfortunately, it looks like we're out of time for this segment of the program. Gus, General Parker, thank you, and really appreciate your time today.
Certainly. Thanks so much to you for leading us through this, and special thanks to Booz Allen as well.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for your service, sir. Thanks, Daniela.
Thanks, Gus.
Thank you both.
The battle space of the future depends on information superiority. Connected and secure data ensures mission success. Currently, data is siloed with no cohesive data platform, leaving warfighters with insufficient information from the enterprise to the tactical edge. The answer? Next generation data solutions. An open yet secure federated data platform connected across domains, enabling trusted data sharing and advanced analytics from the enterprise to the tactical edge. With an integrated data platform, data from various sources and formats are fed into a common operating picture, protected from adversaries. Warfighters access trusted data in real time in the right format, even at the tactical edge. Advanced analytics and AI tools can quickly integrate, and platforms are adaptable to various missions. Next-generation data solutions are the essential equipment needed for tomorrow's battles. Learn more at boozallen.com/nextgendata.
Welcome back, everyone, to the JADC2 Connecting the Future Force for Interoperability, brought to you today by Booz Allen Hamilton. I'm excited to dive into the second half of today's program. And for this section, I'm pleased to welcome Preston Dunlap, Chief Architect, Department of the Air and Space Force, and Kate Mercer, Vice President, Next Generation Data Solution, Global Defense Group at Booz Allen Hamilton. Welcome. I thought I would start by introducing you both and asking if you might take a moment just to tell the audience a little bit about yourselves and your background and your current role. Preston, can I begin with you, please?
Great, Danielle, thanks. Thanks for having me, and I appreciate the engagement conversation here with Kate in your previous session too. So my name is Preston Dunlap. I'm the founding chief architect of the Air and Space Forces. What that means is that our Secretary of the Air Force and Space Force, the two chiefs, recognize and need a team of folks to be able to ensure that our technology can actually keep up to speed and pace with modernization in the commercial world, and then ensure that not only can we adopt those technologies, but our capabilities across our $70 billion of acquisition, development, and programs across the two services actually come together to achieve the missions that our combatant commanders and the two services need. So our Chief Architect Office has the responsibility across that $70 billion of investment to ensure that we can modernize rapidly and then integrate. It's been a privilege to be here. I've had the opportunity to do 2 startup technology companies in the internet space, worked for 5 secretaries of defense, and then oversaw a department at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. And it's a privilege to be back in the last 2 years in government, helping the secretary and the 2 chiefs accomplish some important missions, to include the one we're specifically talking about here with joint all-domain operations.
That's great. Kate?
Thanks, Danielle. It's a pleasure to be here with you and Preston today to discuss this important topic. I actually have a really exciting role at Booz Allen. As you mentioned, I lead our global defense next generation data solutions business. And I get to work across our DoD footprint supporting JADC2. But I also get to interact with many industry partners. I also lead IR&D projects for our CTO Council. I've been with Booz Allen for over 21 years and really have enjoyed being part of our technology solutions business.
Well, you both bring a wealth of experience, and so I'm looking forward to diving into this conversation today. We have been talking about the integration of this very ambitious effort of joint all-domain operations, and I wanted to start by asking you all to talk about the culture of the people, the human element here. And I wanted to know how important you think the culture's role is in the creation of effective strategy and then the adoption of JADC2. And Preston, since you're in the thick of things there, I thought I'd ask you to begin.
Yeah, well, Danielle, I'm glad you started with people. Everything really starts and ends with people. So, and not just from though I'm currently in a technology role, we shouldn't think that we're just talking about technology, right? So you've got to have a culture that's embracing and recognizing the potential operations that you have to be involved in, a very operational focused mindset. And that's a clear recognition in the world of joint all domain operations that we can no longer sort of relegate things to, you operate over there, I'll be over here, you do that, I'll do this thing, and think that we'll be able to accomplish the objectives that our national security enterprise and our allies and partners need us, and we need them to be able to do together. And all those things blend together into a mosaic of integrated capabilities. And from an operational perspective, it drives us to be able to partner and work together. And that means relationally, we have to have trust and know how to work together across our service partners and in the international community. It means technologically, we have to be able to build capabilities that allow that collaborative partnership in real time, where lives are at stake, either ours or those we're trying to help are there, and it's an imperative to be able to do that. And then it's a willingness to embrace both the technology and the new operational concepts that are bright folks out on the field, from the lowest to the highest ranking individuals, are trying to pull together to make a difference, so that we can blur those lines and recognize that they're already blurred and then operate in them. And that means we also have to have programmatics and budgetary and finance and program managers that understand that to be able to move at the speed of technology and move at the speed of operations in today's world, it requires that we can't do everything in a linear fashion. And that requires getting comfortable and used to being bold, taking what you might consider risks to be able to try things out quickly, and learn, experiment, and grow. And that's a different culture than the ones that, say, the Cold War era that we had, where we could take a long time to go evaluate, build something, try it out, and then use it in a very long sort of linear fashion. And we're in a world where a culture is required to be able to be just like we are in software, from a development and operations perspective, writing code very quickly. It's the same mentality that we have to have for operations and hardware and software and platforms. It's all got to be able to work together. And that requires an adaptive, a relationally cohesive and a trusting partnership, whether you're sitting on an appropriations committee in Congress, or an authorizing committee, or at the White House, or you're in one of the services or the Secretary of Defense's office. And all of those key stakeholders in the public and our allies and partners have to work together to achieve it. And so we could dive into any one of those at great length, but I think that I totally agree with your main point, which is that human capital, people are both at the center, operating and being creative, but then also being able to pull this together from a programmatic, budgetary, and execution perspective, and everything in between.
And Kate, what are you seeing in this regard, from the industry's perspective and from all the customer base that you serve?
Yeah, I definitely concur with all the great comments that Preston and points that he's made. I'd like to, highlight, maybe an example. If we would focus in specifically on data, data is a strategic asset, but, traditionally has been owned by the service or the program that generates it. It's a culture shift in data ownership and sharing. So that's where the people elements, more specifically on that example, will come into play. The data from varying sensors today is compiled in separate databases. It's not accessible by any single application or AI tool. We really need to put the operator at the center and facilitate the data sharing across enterprise. Now, DoD has made great strides. The Open Data Act helped advance the culture for data standardization, non-proprietary formats. The stand-up of the DoD Chief Data Officer and the CDOs for each service has also elevated the priority of a DoD strategy for JADC2. So those all contribute to that cultural shift. But I also wanted to mention, to further create that shift, I'd love to see a government model where, encouraging programs to publish open APIs as an incentive to make data visible and consumable by others. And then the API usage model could help characterize the value of the data to the mission. All of these are just really enablers for that culture shift to happen.
So can we expand a little bit on that data issue? Because I think you're right. Data is the key resource here. So how is moving data across different classification levels, a challenge or difficult? And Kate, maybe you could continue on your line of thinking, and then Preston, I'd love to hear your opinion on that as well.
Sure. So, in general, I would say, low to high data transfers are fairly common. High to low transfers are much more difficult. There are still a lot of manual processes with moving data across classification levels. Not all approved cross-domain solutions are compatible with every network architecture. You must use an approved, cross-domain product. It may require data transfers within a government-owned facility, which, just frankly adds complexity. And in general, the approval process, to use new tools can take months. So these are just some of the processes and technical challenges, but, you can see there is an opportunity for automation and more efficiency.
Yeah, great, Kate. And I think, I'll just kind of expand it slightly, Daniel, if that's okay. So I think there's kind of four main principles, I think perhaps involved here. So one is we got to have a relational leadership. That means we have to work together as a team, which is important. Certainly the cross security boundaries, the specific example you asked about is a very great case study in that. second thing is we gotta have that relational leadership supported by trust and transparency across the services, commercial partners, and other entities. That trust and transparency and leadership has to be enabled third by really a technology that can keep up the pace with that and provide the appropriate measures and security, not just compliance, but real security and trust across those networks. And then number four, you've got to drive that whole cycle, those first three things, through a series of demonstrations and evaluations and experimentation. So you don't get stuck sort of just looking at blueprints on the screen or on paper, or a great idea after a conference, but you're actually moving rapidly into something that's real and prototyping and developing minimum viable capabilities that expand over time. And so things like moving data between data owners is really important and key. You've got to have those four principles to make it work. Across the security boundaries is no different, or rinse and sort of repeat that same question for allies and partners data as well, where we might have certain standards, others might have them as well. And so to that end, I guess I'll just sort of announce it here, just so you know that, Danielle, and those listening, that we're just finishing up 2-week long data architecture summit for the Air Force and Space Force. This is something that I worked with our acting secretary and General Raymond and General Brown, our two chiefs for Air Force and Space Force, and our joint partners, where we're spending 2 weeks all together, some virtually, some in person, to be able to lay out options and choices to be able to bring in commercial partners for data across the different services, and to design a technical architecture that supports that warfighter and operator at the end. And so we're looking to head into some significant decisions in June by our two service chiefs and either the acting, or if confirmed, the new secretary for the Air Force and Space Force. We're going to make some bold moves in data and the infrastructure around it. And certainly things like cross-domain and others are going to be an important element to that, as well as zero trust architecture, devices, and the list could go on from a technology perspective. But we're all in on this. We know it's important. We've got to lead the way and keep the momentum that's been going over the last 18 months here to be able to expand and make these capabilities, not talking points, but real. And so I'm excited as we close out the Data Architecture Summit this week, and then head into June with some significant sort of decision opportunities by our leadership.
Preston, thank you so much for sharing that news with us. That's very exciting. Let me ask you if you could dig in a little bit on the development of what everyone's talking about, the Advanced Battle Management System, or ABMS, at the Air Force. Like, how will the bigger picture incorporate data, infrastructure, emerging technologies, to revolutionize these operational capabilities? I mean, I think you just touched on that with your, the news here, but can we dig in a little bit more and just give us an overview of that?
Yeah, well, we should be clear that this is no one program or is going to, in any service, is going to solve what we're talking about here. We've got to have intelligence community, State Department, Defense Department, allies and partners working together to be able to unlock the power of the data that we have that is being unused and thrown away even, and to the data that we know we need but aren't actually collecting or appropriately filing it. And so the data summit, data architecture summit that we're doing these 2 weeks is really to get after that across at least our two services, the Space Force and the Air Force, across all $70 billion of programs that we have, of which some of them have their own data investments. We've got about 10 sort of very large programs that have their own data approaches and architectures that are being built. And so we're exploring how we can move and migrate those into modern data architectures and approaches, and then be able to pull that into a broader department-wide data fabric. That includes things like some of our cyber programs that we have, as well as our intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, and imagery exploitation activities, and to include ABMS, or Advanced Battle Management System, focus on the C2 elements going forward. So we've got to have all of these programs, certainly within our two services where we have direct purview and can make changes. And we're doing that back to the relational leadership in great partnership with each of our sister services and allies and partners. And to that extent, February was a big milestone for us on an allies perspective, where we're able to take our growing minimum viable product on data, infrastructure, and artificial intelligence and begin to pull in various European allies in February here to be able to bring that data network and fabric together, where we move away from a single entity or force unit like a fighter or a platform or a software system having to negotiate a 1v1 direct relationship, and to be able to expand it into a many-to-many relationships in our modern data architecture that we built. And to that extent, we've added about 290 new data feeds into our enterprise data environment across multiple systems. And once you do that once, everybody benefits. Whereas historically, that would have been 290 separate negotiations for every single program. And so these are the kinds of very tangible benefits that we're able to achieve here when we think how to do this with a warfighter, an operator at the center, and then pull modern technology right next to them.
Preston, as you just mentioned, it's a collaborative effort across a lot of organizations, and I wanted to ask Kate if maybe she could comment on some of the other programs and the other services, such as Project Overmatch with the Navy, Project Convergence, Futures Command. What are you hearing about how this is going with the collaboration across the services?
Yeah, I definitely see the momentum has been picking up here recently with a lot of different events. So, Project Overmatch for the Navy, Project Convergence for the Army, and ABMS for Air Force are really the exercise proving grounds for JADC2 interoperability. Demonstrations are being performed on production environments such as JWICS and SIPR. So although they are exercises, the demonstrations are very close to operational. These exercises are important, I think, just to bring together the different services and help with that transparency to demonstrate, sensor to effector scenarios. There are also valuable opportunities to show the ability to share data between the different services through a single data fabric so that we're fighting that common threat. We just participated and saw this firsthand with a recent Air Force and Army collaboration and demonstration to the service chiefs. And then the Navy just recently announced, that they will be participating with the Army's PC-21 event.
So I want to ask both of you, there's so much going on right now, but what does the future look like? What are we looking at in terms of this becoming a reality in 5 years, in 10 years? Like, what's the timeline to make this effective and sustainable? And Preston, I'm going to ask you to lead us off there.
Yeah, so let's talk about timeline. So I think it depends on when you kind of define what the start point is, but I'd say we're both late and have already started. So in that sense, let's just kind of walk through the timeline over the last few months. So December 2019, at least for our department and perhaps for DoD writ large, although I certainly would hesitate to claim that. December 2019 was when we really sort of kicked off the ability, with only 2 months of planning, of being able to pull together integrated data and what we call kill chains. But basically, it's something sees something, and then you go through a myriad of processes to go take some kind of effect or an execution of an operation. And that was sort of our first window to prove that we could actually sort of break the 7 to 10 year typical cycle in program development, and not just in software, but actually with hardware too, be able to get something that operators can put in their hands and use. And that was sort of key milestone number one, December 2019. We call that the demonstration evaluation event number one, or formally on-ramp. And then in March 2020, COVID hit, and we took our data enterprise and then focused all of the people and the technology on COVID-19. And again, within about 45 to 60 days, we had new devices deployed to New York City and the Javits Center. We pulled in and integrated data from handfuls of various civil agencies and commercial data sets to be able to get it so that our operators could take advantage of that information. And every person that was at the forefront providing medical services, not only we could help ensure that they had the right protective gear and understand their health status, but to be able to assimilate the data and apply artificial intelligence assessments to where we think the COVID virus was going, to then push people where we thought they would need to go. That was sort of milestone 2. Number 3 was September 2020, where we had 2 huge events. Where we ran through 20 something different kill chains to be able to push data through a whole number of pipelines, from sensors to shooters to effects, and then built the first translation capability to be able to move data between 5th generation, 4th generation, and back and forth, and ground controllers to be able to do those bits and bytes communication, kind of like C3PO with a little R2D2 artificial intelligence layered on top for a little sci-fi reference. And then I mentioned the February timeline here, where we brought in allies and partners into that data network. And going forward to your question about what's ahead, we've got to keep this pace up. Software needs to deploy code multiple times a day. We've got to be able to do hardware and software integration and put the tactic, techniques, and procedures wrapped around those across our fellow services and international partners in weeks and months time period. So we're going to keep that pace going. And our next big milestone is in July, where we've already had great partnerships, but we're going to do our 5th architecture demonstration evaluation event for the Space Force and the Air Force. And what that means is being able to modernize digitally the entire 2 services, of which data, infrastructure, and AI, which we're talking about here, is sort of essential. But it enables a number of missions, from joint all-domain operations to agile combat employment and flexibility to layered base defense, to even ensuring that we have safety in space and ensure that satellites can operate very safely and effectively. And July will be our next opportunity to do that. And we're going to do that in partnership with nearly every combatant commander, where we've combined our demonstration evaluation event number 5 with what is known as Guide 3, their globally information dominance event here with our combatant commander partners. And so their Guide 3 events and our ADU 5 event are going to work together to be able to explore integration of data at the strategic and operational level. And we just got to keep moving like that together across all the services in the joint community at speed and pace. And so I would say we've already started. It already exists. It's just got to keep growing and expanding.
And Kate, what's your perspective on
Yeah, no, I definitely think there's a sense of urgency, and I don't think there's really an endpoint to Preston's talking points that he had. We already have capabilities that are delivered and deployed today. It's basically enhancing and more connection between those capabilities. We are entering a new landscape with the digital battle space. And, while we are focused on technology solutions, there are also institutional roles and processes that do directly impact the timeline for JADC2. One example, we are entering, in my mind, kind of the age of a new AO, an authorizing official, who accredits and takes responsibility for a system. Traditionally, these roles have many boundaries, often by organization or system. But in the future, with things like DevSecOps and CI/CD pipelines, they can be focused on the complete mission thread. They are the leaders who will partner with, our program owners to support the mission from enterprise to the edge. So, in terms of, warfighters and what they can expect, I think there are some exciting things. Preston alluded to some of those things as well. We're seeing an increased interest in AI at the edge. People are generally using cloud for AI operations today, but we are investing in packaged AI and edge systems for localized decision making. So you don't have to send your data over the network, but if you do, you just send what is important. We also see interest in operator machine teaming, which means operators don't spend days pouring through data. So there's definitely some exciting things on the horizon for warfighters and leaders.
You've both been so informative today. I wish we had more time. Every time I have a conversation like this, I learn something. I want to thank you both for being here today and sharing your insights. I want to thank Booz Allen Hamilton for supporting this program, And I want to thank our audience for joining us today. The link to today's recorded webcast will be sent to everybody by email at the end of this week, I think. Keep a watch out for it and share it with others. Again, thank you both so much for being here. I greatly appreciate it.
Thanks, Daniela.
Thanks, Danielle.